Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this online conversation brought to you by Business Day in partnership with Salesforce. I'm Alicia Second. Well, if anything, the past 2 years, going on 3, has shown us why the digital divide is a gap that needs to be closed. Like it or not, already rapid and widespread digitalisation has changed the nature of work, and that's made having the right digital skills at hand a necessary imperative. But the current status quo is far from that. Demand is high, while the supply of people with these skills is low. And what that's done is feed a new form of disparity in South Africa. That is a digital inequality. Now, digital inequality doesn't just affect people's lives and career opportunities on an individualized basis. Failure to prioritize addressing the skills gap will have negative impacts for businesses and, in turn, economic growth as well. So over the next hour, we're putting the focus on breaking barriers in 2022 with the hope that the engagement is going to provide business executives from all industries with a few strategies to help start effectively bridging that digital skills gap. Before we get into it though, ladies and gentlemen, while bulk of the conversation will be happening on this platform this morning with you listening in, we do want you to keep things as interactive as possible. So we want you to get involved via the Q&A feature on the comment section of the streaming webpage. Send through any questions the discussion triggers on your end, and I'll pose as many of them as I possibly can to the esteemed panel of guests that have joined me this morning. On that note, joining me today, Dimekatso Machocha, she's a Chief Operating Officer at Sation, Zoko Mdwaba, who's Head of Sales at Salesforce South Africa. Also from Salesforce South Africa, Linda Saunders, she's Head of Solution Engineering, and then Tiniko Simbina as well, who's co-founder and CFO of Girl Code. Welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us this morning, of course, as we delve into things, because this is a very big topic that we're looking at here. It's a topic that I feel we've been beating the drum about for the longest while now. So we need to start engaging on effective mechanisms to trigger change, right? So Dimekatso, I'm going to start off with you, just with a point of departure. And it may sound like a very basic question, but we need to set the scene here. When we talk about the digital divide, what exactly are we looking at?
Thank you for that question. And to me, the digital divide really alludes to the disparity and unequal distribution of access, of usage, and even adoption of technologies between the haves and have-nots, between it can be on margins of whether it's race, it could be age, it could be gender, but that gap that gets created in terms of the adoption of technologies, and that translates in the socio-economic development impacts as well that are adverse for the disadvantaged and disenfranchised. So that's how I see it.
Yeah. Tiniko, it's interesting because, yes, it's the story of the haves and the have-nots, right? But we further have to look at then divides within the divide. So whether you're looking black, white, male, female, talk us through that and the extent of the complexity of the divide here.
Yeah, so with the world being so technologically advanced and getting even more and more technologically advanced, the divide between the rich and the disadvantaged widens, because as a country we lack so many skills as well as infrastructure, and the disadvantaged are getting behind, with women obviously being the larger group that is more marginalized than the males.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Linda, can we be simplistic about this and say, bottom line, what's the root cause? Is this an affordability issue?
I don't think we can say it's just an affordability issue per se. I mean, I think we've had this conversation for some time now about digital and its potential to be an enabler. I think we really need to maybe have some harder conversations around, if we really are serious about digital inclusion being a societal imperative, then what are we doing as individuals, our roles and our responsibilities to really make that right possible in our society? Mm-hmm. So, root cause, I'm going to say, probably for me, I think it's more of a coordinated effort, not just about skills, but also about enabling those skills.
Yeah. Zuko, Tiniko highlighting the fact that, we've had digital advancements take hold of of society in a very big way here. How much more apparent would you say the digital divides become with COVID having forced the world of work into the digital arena, despite the lack of readiness on so many levels?
Thanks for having us. I think it has in a very, very big way. I mean, as bad as the pandemic was, I think one of the biggest silver linings out of that was just amplifying the power of digital, you know. But again, it also amplified the fact that the gap is, before you get to digital, there's a gap between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, if you take, whether it is in the corporate world or it's in government or it's in schools, you could see that digital divide, because there were kids that were able to go to school and there were kids that were not able to go to school because of access that you've mentioned, Dimakato. So for me, I think the crux of the whole thing starts with the unequal society that we live in. I think that's a fundamental point, that way it starts at. Just this morning I heard on the news there were talks about South Africa being #1 in the world in terms of unequal, you know. So that is the foundation of the crisis that we have. And I think everybody has to come on board to try and narrow that gap.
Yeah. Where we know, Dimakatso, that COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation, what impact do you think it's had on the digital divide? Has it widened exponentially because the root cause is very deep-seated?
I would say it has exacerbated it to a degree, in that, as you're saying, it's widened it really, in that it highlighted as much as it advanced technological adoption for those who have. Those who don't have became way more left behind now. And the challenge now becomes, how do we identify what that gap elongation is, really, before you even try to match the gap that we originally had. So there's now a need for a field study to really understand further.
Are you already starting to see what effect it's had on society and the economy at large?
I mean, when you look at the metric results of last year, and you link it back to that, and that those who were in the rural areas and peri-urban areas, the access to resources to education wasn't, as Zuko was saying, wasn't as effective as those who are in the urban areas. So, as a matter of fact, the fact that there's so many challenges that are now being seen in terms of the pass rate, especially in the rural areas, that has gone down. It highlights something. As much as we can't, that's why I say we need to go back to the field and really assess what the damage is before we even try to map it and to bridge it.
Yeah. While these field studies, Linda, still have to be done, right? We've got a broad sense of what we're dealing with, the current state of the digital divide and what it's costing us, so to speak. It should be glaring then, one would assume, the importance of not only broadening access, but upskilling talent as well. How much of a post-pandemic priority do you think broadening access and upskilling has become in this arena?
You know, I'm thinking about this question in more of a business context because, throughout my career I've been working with sort of digital transformation and seen how much investment's gone into digital transformation in organizations. And then sort of seeing there's also sort of a trend that there isn't upskilling or reskilling happening at the pace with which it needs to. If you think about technology changes so rapidly. I mean, not so many years ago, we didn't have smartphones. Now all of a sudden they're pervasive. I think we have one of the highest smartphone penetrations in the world. And so if you're not upskilling and reskilling, you really are doing a disservice to the people that you employ. And I think that's really going to be an imperative for business if they want to stay relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Tiniko, just to bring you in here, research shows that even if children have an equal IQ level and are just capable at succeeding, if one student has access to the internet and the other student doesn't, then that IQ equality doesn't show. So is it safe to say that the digital impact or that impact is felt from childhood level?
Yes, most definitely. We already see it in our education system. Like Zuko mentioned, how some kids were able to still continue at school whilst others weren't. And that was purely because of infrastructure and lack of resources. Both the children had the same IQ level, but the one just had more of an advantage because of the resources and access to digital access. That made them obviously have a bigger advantage, which is why it's important as a nation for all of us to band together, because what I feel is happening right now, all of us are working in silos. So hence why the transformation isn't moving or happening as rapidly as it should be, especially as she just mentioned that technology is advancing so quickly. And we as a country are definitely not keeping up, and our youth are getting left behind. Hence the unemployment rate is so high.
And that leads me to the next question, because if the impact is felt from a childhood level, Dimakatso, when does society start feeling the effect?
Well, I would say, and I want to piggyback on what you were saying first, and just say, Tinyuko was saying, the child who's not endowed to be able to access gets affected in terms of their IQ. And you see it in so many facets and platforms. For example, if you say the socio-economic development of a child, I mean, you know that formative years of up to 7, you are most observant, you're sort of a sponge. And at the same time, so I'm coming to your question to say, when does it get felt into the society? That child starts contributing into society from that time throughout. So when you get to the point where now they go to school and they get to deteriorate, to go backwards, to unlearn what they had learned because of the access, the lack of access. And we're talking not only an issue of infrastructure, an issue of access, but an issue of being able to utilize that which you have access to as well. So the impact gets felt throughout, and we can bring the percentage pass rate down as much as we want. It's not only a matter of having access to it, it's also a matter of being able to have that paradigm shift. And it speaks now to the multifaceted angles of society. It's not just only the child. And the elders that are bringing the child up, the businesses that are surrounding the child's community, it has to be a coordinated effort. It has to be an ecosystem approach to say how do we, and it has to be an adaptive ecosystem. What works for Alexandra will not work for Qwaqwa and will not work for Sandton. We have to have an adaptable mindset to say where does it cannot be a one-size-fits-all kind of approach when coming to digital transformation.
Especially, Zuko, if you're looking at a context like that, that South Africa puts on the table, right, where even basic needs aren't being met for a large part of the population. And here I'm talking access to clean running water, electricity, food, safe shelter, access to proper healthcare services. And this really what the digital world and digital access comes up again. So how should we be reconciling the two?
We all have to come on board and be part of the solution. I think that's a critical element. The irony about the whole thing is, I mean, it's quite cliche to hear people talking about every crisis there is an opportunity. And I think that's a nice way of looking at it. The one opportunity that we have in our country is the fact that it's an irony. I mean, we've got the big percentage of our population is the youth. Linda alluded to the cell phone penetration. That's technology. They're using smartphones. They've got access to that. Of course, there's a gap that needs to be closed around ensuring that the poorest of the poor and the people that are seriously disadvantaged are able to have access to that. But the opportunity around that is coming together and being part of the solution in terms of leveraging on our strengths. I mean, the fact that we've got that high cell phone penetration is a positive for us. Youth. We're one of the leading countries in the world that has got a high percentage of youth. And we all know with kids, I mean, they literally absorb technology much easier than most. And to your point, Dimakatso, now, we're working against time as well, because the older the kids get, the more challenging it becomes in terms of adopting.
Okay. Tinyuko, I asked that question because it's almost a precursor to set the context for how we deliberate or how we start to think about then bridging the gap when so many people don't have access to reliable internet facilities or Wi-Fi for that matter. How are you feeling about that? How do we start getting this right?
I think it's back to my previous point that we all need to work together, but I think also we need more help from the commercial sector, the private sector, where organizations who are who have internet and who sell internet solutions to get into these disadvantaged communities and build this infrastructure in these communities in partnership with government. As we've all realized that, technology is advancing at a very rapid pace.
Yeah, I know I usually keep our Q&A session for the latter part of the conversation, but the questions have been coming through hard and fast. And I'm going to put this to you, Linda, because it ties in with what we're talking about right now. But what do you think the approach should be to the digital divide in the rural and peri-rural communities? How do we even begin to start bridging the gap in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of conversations, over the weeks leading up to this, and we've had conversations with a lot of fellow businessmen and businesses that have been really focusing on trying to understand how they can impact. And what we've really realized is there seems to be a real lack of coordination. I mean, for the first time, we're discovering that an organization is focusing on this, or they have an initiative that they've kicked off that is really trying to uplift a community. And I think as businesses, we need to start having a more coordinated approach. And I mean, that's potentially partnering with NGOs, that's potentially really working together to look at how we cover all of the elements, not just sort of our segment, but working together. And I think that coordination is probably where the crux of the matter lies.
Tinyiko, I know we're talking about business involvement and corporate involvement here. The Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies recently said that every South African will be given access to 10 gigabytes of free data. And while that sounds great, you've got to ask, is this viable, and who fits the bill at the end of the day? Because not only do you have the cost of bandwidth to consider here, it's the actual hardware, the reliable technology to consider as well.
Yeah, I think it's a yes and a no. Yes, it is feasible from the point that, as Zuko mentioned, kids are playing with technology. But the other thing is that a lot of South Africans now have access to smartphones. Even the disadvantaged, even if it is a basic cell phone, it still has access to the internet. So with that data, they can use that to log on and upskill themselves with online programs that are available now. Because the internet has allowed for that. As much as obviously not everybody can afford the technology, and having laptops and computers, like you say, is obviously the better option, and especially long term. But it does help to a certain degree. And then when it comes to the bandwidth, that one is a challenge on its own. And I think we'll have to unpack that. As Linda said earlier, about how we need to, channel our focus and the purpose of, this digital divide.
Yeah. Looking at bandwidth, Zuko, how much of a solution does government auctioning off spectrum offer? I mean, ICASA kicking off, I think, the main auction today, in fact, and it's the country's first spectrum auction that we're seeing in a decade.
It's long overdue, and crossing fingers that we eventually get to that point. But it's also important that we don't only look up to government to do these things. I think government helps with legislation and unlocking the economy and making sure that corporates are able to do what we do best. So for me, the 10 gigabytes that's going to be out there, I think government cannot do it on their own. Government, corporates have to come on board and be part of the solution. I think that's an opportunity that we have. The other thing that you mentioned, Tinyiko, is that when that access is there, the content is there, because there is so much that's out there. That the challenge is that it's this digital divide that people are not able to access it. So to answer your question around spectrum, I mean, it's the start of bigger opportunities for the country.
I've got to ask a question that's come through. Will the auction of broadband spectrum exacerbate or be one of the catalysts for bridging that digital divide?
I think it'll be a catalyst.
Okay.
I'm a half full glass kind of person, so I think it is a catalyst.
And the role of government then in terms of, the part it has to play amidst all of this, does it go beyond data infrastructure provision at all? Or do you think then it's just the corporate's responsibility?
We've mentioned a couple of times that technology is advancing at a very, very rapid pace. You know, the conversation that we'll be having a year from now is probably going to be very different from what we're talking about now. You had the talk about 5G recently over the past couple of years. So that is even a bigger enabler because the telco world is constantly advancing, ensuring that when countries like ours want to have that rapid deployment of access throughout. By the way, I think what's important that we should never ever forget is that we shouldn't only focus on the 10%. The 90% are the ones that are going to help. If we're looking at this 30+ unemployment rate and the urbanization that has been happening, that has been putting a lot of strain in the urban world, it's a symptom of the challenges that we have. So if we're able to give this access throughout the country so that everyone, there is no reason why someone in a rural village shouldn't be able to have access, and access Trailblazer that hopefully Linda will talk about at some point. Yeah.
We'll be getting to that in a bit, but Dimakatsa, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. We've established, right, that we can't talk about the digital divide without mentioning digital access. So how do we practically go about overcoming the barrier of digital access, and what specifically then is the role of business?
Yes, and I appreciate that question, and latching on to what you were saying, really, that it's not only a government issue, and government and business need to dance in concert to this one here. And awareness, we know, as you know, in program management, when you do that mega infrastructure project, you start with a communication plan ahead of time. So we need to enable, to create readiness of adoption and access, because even if the spectrum is auctioned today and access is there today, the uptake might be there for wrong reasons. All these children might have access, but not towards socioeconomic development, towards changing their own lives, towards having that impact that we're after. So we need to now have a concerted effort of taking each other's hands and making sure that we create that awareness out there while we are waiting in anticipation. And I want to go back to the question that you asked, and I'm going to ask you to repeat it, please.
Just looking at the role of business then, amidst it all, what role does business practically have to play here?
Okay, so business, we have to go beyond that's just our simplistic CSI initiatives. It has to go now to becoming more intentional and more purpose-driven in terms of what we're going to do to create out there. If I come and give you and build a digital, let's say, lab for you as a school, what am I saying? And if I pump the training and free solutions, free enabling training and development programs, what am I saying? How does it translate to me bettering the environment that I'm in?
Yeah.
Whether it's through me enterprising or me being employed. Let's take the conversation further from just me ticking a tick box to say I've done my CSI initiative for the year.
Yeah.
And yes, so that's what I'm saying. Business must be intentional and really think long term. And I always say, if I make just quickly go in, and I always say, you always think that I'm taking my children to private school, I'm sorted. But guess what? Life goes around. Your children are gonna fall in love with someone who's not in the private school. So you might as well. Yes. You know.
Exactly, and that takes the conversation then beyond, having sheer access to the resource, and that's exactly what Dimakatsa was highlighting right at the top of the answer. That there's got to be a shift as well in curriculum on offer to Linda. Those that are access to those who are adequately equipped to impart the knowledge and the training and skills development.
Yeah, certainly. And I think you're quite right, Dikatso, in terms of what you're saying in terms of the corporate narrative. I think the corporate narrative certainly has been a big shift, and certainly we're seeing it, a big shift from sort of the CSI initiatives and really looking after your own to saying, how do we broaden our ecosystem? How are our businesses going to represent, the places where we work in? And being representative means that you have to have that access. And we have a wonderful platform, we call it Trailhead. And what we've done is we've learned from training our own people, and we've made that free to access to anybody. And we use this concept of sort of micro-learning. Because if we think about people and meeting them where they are, they're not a full-time employee. They may not have access to all the time in the world to study. So how do we make these small sort of segments where they can learn digital skills, where, I mean, ours is particularly there's Salesforce skills, digital skills, but there's also soft skills, because people forget soft skills are also quite an imperative if you're talking about the digital landscape. I think we saw that with work from home. We had a whole different skill shift change.
Linda, is this a solo performance, or are you dancing in concert with government?
Look, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had, and deeper conversations. I don't think that we're intending to dance solo, but I think we definitely could be more cooperative, and I think we need to focus on being more cooperative. And I mean, we've had a couple of people mention this now, but you know, digital doesn't start with digital. It starts with a full stomach. It starts with, you know, sort of social imperatives that need to be building blocks to maybe unlocking digital skills in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get onto that skills conversation, Azuko. And, you know, it was really apt that I was preparing for this discussion this week, because, bear with me here, it's a week when I had to test my son on grade 4 technology theory. And, you know, they were learning that technology is a way to think and solve problems. And in order to do that, we need to be cognizant of needs and wants before we can put any kind of solution on the table, right? So in that vein, what are some of the critical skills that the workplace is lacking right now?
So, I mean, fundamentally, when you look at skills, there are those functional skills that have been around that our parents wanted to start a career on. You know, this is like being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a journalist, being, you know, all those, you know. But we're living in an era now when we're talking about digital. Digital comes with its own challenges or opportunities. You know, I think it's a combination of the two. For example, cybersecurity is something that we all vulnerable to. You know, it is an opportunity. So as a skill, there's a gap around cybersecurity. People who understand security from a cyber point of view and can be, you know, be part of the solution in terms of ensuring that we are all safe from a cybersecurity point of view. The other one is data and analytics. It's huge. I mean, one of the most critical things is number crunching and understanding the data and understanding and corporates, including government. It is important to understand that, for example, if you look at it in a government context, for them to be relevant to society, it is important that they have the data at their fingertips. You know, that's something that's important. I would argue that there's still a way to go around that. And then the other one is there's artificial intelligence, which is now is a combination. I mean, when you look at the future of work and talking about machines and people, again, that comes from people that are not exposed to these things. It comes as a threat. And people don't realize that it's actually an opportunity, because it means that people now have an opportunity to excel at the things that cannot be done by a machine, because not everything can be done by a machine. So those are those kinds of skills that need to be created. Obviously, the fundamentals that we've discussed over the past half an hour are key to having that as a foundation.
Before I let you go, how much of a difference between that and the skills that are likely to be in demand in the future?
It's quite big. I think it's a function of what we do in the short term. I mean, I can certainly talk about what we're doing in my organization as Salesforce. I mean, one of the things we've done, obviously, there are organizations that do these studies and look at projections and things like that. There's a report by IDC where they talk about how big the digital world is going to be in years to come. And just like how quickly technology evolves, these periods have now really, really shortened. I mean, when we look at the Salesforce space, for example, we believe that by 2026 we'll have more than 31,000 people that are skilled, digitally skilled on Salesforce. So that's one. We believe that there's going to be an economy as a result of this that's going to be created. That's more than $5 billion by 2026. I mean, we're in 2022 now, so it's a matter of time. So in that vein, because we also want to be part of the solution, because as a corporate, we've got partners, we've got customers, we are working on extending this and being part of the solution from an ecosystem point of view, because again, one organization is not going to be the silver bullet. You know, it's the stakeholders that we have around us.
And luckily, you're not going it alone, Tiniko. One of the targets that you've got at Girl Code is to empower 10 million females with tech skills by 2030. How's that going?
It's going well. We've had the pleasure of partnering with very big corporates, both in the country as well as overseas, and this has helped to increase our reach as well as grow our number of beneficiaries, which has been absolutely amazing, especially considering that, you know, this technological world is advancing so much, and COVID causing us to think of a very very different solutions to help combat that. Now we're having online conferences, schooling is online. So I think for us, it's been absolutely amazing and very important for us to upskill our youth with these skills that they need, especially because we found that with our university curriculum, it doesn't necessarily equip them for what corporates are looking for. So we've come in to bridge that gap and then partner with corporates and say, hey, we've upskilled these young ladies who have degrees from these esteemed varsities, and they now have the skills that you are looking for, so please then hire them. That doesn't only close the high unemployment rate, but we also upskill them with the skills that they need for the future. And they can then also pay it forward for the next young person that is coming up.
Are you having any conversations with government about shifts that need to happen in curriculum?
We have tried, but we will try again. It hasn't been an easy conversation. So how we've decided to tackle that issue is by actually going out into the government schools and actually teaching the schools, the kids in primary as well as high schools, equipping them with coding and robotic skills, because they're getting left behind, especially with private school education having coding and robotics as part of their curriculum. So whilst we're still lagging with the conversation with government, we've decided to go into the government schools and upskill the learners in the interim, just so that by the time the conversation is done, the kids are already equipped and everything is running.
Linda, sorry, you had something to add there.
And I think that there's also another discussion that potentially needs to be had, and that is, you know, what are the technology companies doing to be more inclusive? You know, and I'm thinking about my example, but, you know, are we looking at a no-code situation where people can develop? I think this is also a discussion that needs to be had at the technology level itself. Is your technology is it inclusive? Are you building for inclusivity? And I think that's also maybe potentially a lever that we need to explore a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. An interesting comment that's just come through. How has the school curriculum changed compared to what was taught in 1922? Should coding in primary school be as compulsory as being taught how to write with a 2H pencil within the lines and ruling off as well? And I think that's a very, very valid point. Linda, this is in a very broad ecosystem, right? This is still a very big socio-political hot potato, because digitalization has always been associated with the loss of jobs. That's the reality of how people, for the most part, have read the situation, and it's triggered strong pushback up to this point. Are you starting to see signs of a shift in that perception?
You know, and this is, you can't work in anything to do with digital without this rearing its head as, you know, are the robots taking my job? And certainly with the lack of jobs in the country, you know, this is a hot potato, as you say. You know, Zuko mentioned it. I mean, our IDC report is indicating that we're looking to create over 31,000 jobs. So if we as one organization and with our partners and customers are creating those kind of jobs, surely we also have to appreciate that technology has some really fundamental role to play in creating jobs, in creating wealth. But also I want to say, people forget we are creative. We have skills and talents that are beyond what a machine can do. And I really feel when we talk about digital skills, I really want us to move the conversation away from IT. Really think about digital as something much more encompassing. You know, I mentioned the soft skills, but, you know, soft skills that come with digital, that human creativity that builds new solutions, that's something no machine will ever replace.
Yeah. Talk us through that and, you know, the kind of mindset shifts you're seeing, if any at all, Zuko, out there about approach to digitalization and what this means in terms of how it can translate to the broader economy.
Yeah, I'm laughing because technology is such an interesting thing, because as much as it can open opportunities, it can also create chaos. because of how, I mean, if I tell you something today, someone is probably going to know in the next 10 minutes, you know. In fact, I'm sure a lot of people are watching this. 20, 30 years ago, I could tell you, and it would take forever for people to know in Cape Town or even in Soweto. The challenge that we're sitting with is that there is also that false news or some information that gives people anxiety around those things. But if you were to peel that onion and try and understand, I can tell you now in 2022, all of us, regardless of what jobs we are doing, we perpetually have to upskill ourselves. You know, perpetually have to reinvent ourselves. So what this threat around machines and people is, in my humble opinion, is that I think we need to work more on the mindset. You mentioned mindset. I think it's something that's quite important. It is important that we build a society that's got a growth mindset. You know, how do I better myself tomorrow? How do I become a better person all the time? Because I think that's what life is about. So we have that responsibility to everything that we do. People need to understand that your relevance that you have in what you're doing can never be threatened, except for if what you're doing is something that's repetitive. I mean, it's repetitive, it goes without saying, it's a repetitive process that has to happen. If at 6 a.m. every morning there has to be a batch process that happens, companies are going to get a machine to do that.
Yeah.
But to Linda's point, someone needs to put the human element around that, you know. So that's where the shift becomes very, very important. So humans will always be relevant. That's my view.
Yeah, and it's also bringing relevance to the fore, right? So we talk about skills for the future. It's about making people aware of the opportunities that do exist if we start opening up this digital economy as opposed to closing ourselves to it. So on that note then, Linda, let's talk a little bit more about the Salesforce Trailblazers platform. Elaborate on that and how, if at all, we can potentially tweak or roll that out to broader South Africa.
Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier, but you know, the Trailhead platform and people who use the Trailhead platform are our trailblazers. And really what we did is we created a learning platform, and it's free to use. Anyone can use it anywhere they are. We have over 3 million people registered on that platform, and these people are really actually looking at gaining skills, and that might not be role specific. It could be broader digital skills. There are a lot of soft skills as well. I mean, I've personally learned a hell of a lot of soft skills on that platform, and I didn't necessarily think that, you know, a company like Salesforce would be focusing on that, but they really have put a lot of energy and effort into not just teaching about the product, but actually broadening that skill set. But I want to mention in terms of the conversation and the education piece. I think there is, if we look at ourselves as, I'm an individual, I want to be included in the digital economy. I need access to education. It needs to come to me. It needs to be relevant to me. It needs to make sense to me. But once I'm educated, where do we go from there? And I think that's really maybe the next step in the conversation. So one of the things we've been focusing on, and I must say we have phenomenal support from our partners and from our customers. They've got a lot of initiatives where they're looking at taking people that have invested in getting those skills and saying, how do we connect them to real jobs?
Exactly.
How do we network with these people? And I think that's really the missing link is, once I've got these skills, how am I going to get the job?
And that was exactly going to be my next question. You know, how do you monitor the payoff that what you're investing in is actually translating into translating and fueling into the jobs market?
Yeah, and I think for us, you know, we recently held a career fair, and what we did is we did some measurements there, and we had 200 job seekers that attended that career fair. We had a bunch of employers that were also there, and I'm happy to report, I think at the end of that career fair, 80 people had second round interviews. Now that's a really good hit rate. Yeah. But I think the thing that stood out for me in terms of the feedback from that career fair was, do you know how empowering it is as a person who is new to a job market to have these interactions, network, and start learning those skills? Because, you know, we all know we've been for an interview somewhere and you've thought, oh, you know, how do I get through this? But having those interactions, you know, it builds confidence as well. And I think that's also an element that we need to consider.
In the interim, Taniko, as we build this pipeline up, how's access to foreign skills as a resource being factored into the equation? And you alluded to it as one of the things you do tap into right at the top.
So with access to the internet, the access to foreign skills has been very apparent. especially in the past 2-3 years. As South Africans and Africans, we are able to learn skills that can help us compete with other countries, European countries in the world, which is why, unfortunately and fortunately, we've seen so much of South African talent being exported. So the internet has allowed for us to have access to these skills that are international.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just in that vein, Dimakatso, looking at labor legislation, do you see that hindering at all the ability to bring in foreign skills in order to equip South Africa's workforce more so?
I think, speaking to what you're saying, and may I backtrack and answer another question that you asked earlier on, that what's the role of business in all this? I mean, and I'll come back to this one of how the labor laws and regulations. The role of business is really to create that platform of absorption of those skills. Once Salesforce and others have equipped, and it has to be a demand-led approach in the sense that we pump what we know is going to be absorbed on the employment side. We pump what you know is going to be enterprising. Your IDCs, your SCFs, CFAs are going to fund that into and turn it into a startup, for example. So the regulatory bodies are very key and pivotal, as well as the non-profit sector, because this is a mammoth. It has to be taken with all hands on deck. So the NPCs are going to go there and demystify the issue of AI and being a job stealer, AI being an intimidating thing. And once that demystification has happened, we as business come in and say, we need the skills that can assist us in achieving these goals, these objectives and key results. So it's results-driven, it's objectives-driven, and at the same time, regulatory bodies come now to back up this. And it's not, like I said, it's adaptive. It depends on what the mining sector needs in order to propel the industry and to propel the socio-economic development and the economy of South Africa. So that's now digital transformation translating into economic transformation. And then the regulatory body will back that up only for the mining sector. It doesn't have to be a big blanket covering all, because we know what kind of opportunities we're going to unlock in what kind of time frames. And then we go to the manufacturing sector, we have a similar approach as well. And that concept of collaboration extends beyond just business and government and NPC sector.
Okay.
Academia are the pipeline. They have to come on board. The regulatory bodies, we don't wait for, you don't just come and avail the spectrum. You need to come and be part of the journey until we get this thing done. So that's how I see it.
It's a very fine balancing act that needs to be played here, Zuko. And a question that has come through on the flip side of what I was asking is, how do we discourage then large companies from offshoring digital jobs to places like India in favor of keeping employment local and in South Africa? I mean, this is a very contentious issue right now.
It is a contentious issue, I totally agree. But I think we also need to find a balance around that, because we've got a huge gap that we need to close. So when we do that, we need to do it consciously of the fact that we need to get people to shorten the period of upskilling, because we might need someone in a, European country with a specific skill on cybersecurity to help shorten. I mean, if it's going to take 2 years and it can be shortened to 9 months, we need, because we don't have the luxury of time. So I think there is huge benefit. We live in a global village. I mean, it's hard, especially with digital now. The world is getting smaller and smaller. So my view is that we need to get to a point where we play the long game, okay, instead of just the short game and saying, okay, someone else is taking my job. I think the approach should be, what am I going to be getting from that person? And then when they are done with what they are giving, imparting those skills, and then we can decouple that. It is an opportunity in the short term. It is critical for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Taniko, what are some of the initiatives you'd like to be seeing put in place?
So I'd just like to see more initiatives like ours, where more and more entities upskill the youth, because the youth are our future, and right now they are at like the bottom of the food chain, for lack of a better word. And the future of this country, lies with the youth. So I'd like to see more focus being on the young people of our country, especially now. I mean, with Girl Code taking the initiative of having a 3-month online boot camp for unemployed IT graduates, and then partnering with corporates, giving them the skills that corporates are looking for, and then placing them in these corporates for employment opportunities. I mean, we even had an opportunity of placing 8 of our girls in the UK. So just, I'd like to see more focus on the youth. More youth
Yeah.
development, because that's where the future is, and the youth cannot be left behind, as not in this digital age.
And you are triggering a lot of interest from our audience this morning with regards to your Girl Code Club. What are the enrollment dates for learners from grade 4 to grade 10? Is it only for girls, and how are the members taught?
All right, so with the Girl Coder Club, we focus on teaching coding and robotics to boys and girls in primary as well as high school, and enrollments are currently open. And then we have our online bootcamp that I mentioned, our 3-month online bootcamp, where we upskill unemployed graduates with IT skills such as Java and AWS, depending on what corporates are looking for. And with this, we're going to have an intake in April.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the trade fair side of things, Linda, will there be another career fair in the foreseeable future?
I'm going to say watch this space.
Yeah.
I'm going to say for sure we'll be looking into that based on the success that we've had with the one that we held in February. Yeah.
Okay, let's do some coloring in here. How is Salesforce driving entrepreneurship amongst the youth in the digital landscape?
Look, I think there are a couple of things. Trailhead is obviously our sort of flagship in terms of the education side. I think another one is community. I mean, if I think about people, the youth today, they're really looking for somebody like me that's doing what I'd like to do. And I think it's the telling of stories that is really important in terms of allowing people to feel like they could be excluded. You know, there is nothing more empowering than having a person who felt like maybe digital isn't something they could ever consider as a career, and seeing somebody that has the exact same circumstances, fulfilling that role and being successful. So I think we have a responsibility to share the stories of people that are included in the digital landscape and share them with people like them, so that they're inspired to be part of this journey.
Yeah. Well, I'm tackling a lot of the questions that have been coming through. Dimakatsa, how do we properly support EdTech to help us bridge the digital divide in education?
How do we properly support EdTech?
EdTech, yeah.
So I would say, and I'm answering from the business perspective now, I would say sometimes it's a matter of that intentionality that we started with saying, outline your objective and what the outcome is, and then go for I'd rather we as business make an impact on a smaller scale rather than going broadly. So EdTech, adopt a school, and one school, and take it all the way from cradle to grave to say, out of this school we want 10 CAs, we want 10 engineers, professional engineers, and then we take it from there and say, what kind of a mindset do you need in 2022 to become that engineer in 2030, for example. Then we are intentional in that we transform 10 lives, and those 10 lives, we actually make a pipeline with them and contract to say, I'm giving you all these tools for you to go and also sign on to commit to signing and changing 2 lives in your life.
Yeah.
As a CSI initiative, it's now intentional. It's not a matter of just me doing it as business and we tick a sheets and we have our annual reporting outlining that we did A, B, C, and D. And I like the approach of ecosystems and pipelining, because then we solve it. You solve a momentous problem that will outlive you in your lifetime. So that's the kind of support I see as business, that we come intentionally when you say, for example, what I'm talking about has been done. It has been done. Sometimes it sounds like it's hypothetical, it's out there. Lithuania has done this, and they've turned the country around, and on the basis of changing government from a perspective of going to endorse and volunteer your skills and actually turn things around intentionally. Number one. Number two, the other country that has also achieved this is South Korea. South Korea turned their education around and they used to be one of the poorest countries, and now they're one of the most advanced countries, because their intentionality went to education. They said, we are phasing everything, we're just focusing on this. As business, as academia, as government, we putting all hands on deck towards one function. In South Africa, we are all hands-on. We have so many parallel processes. As we said it earlier on, there's lack of coordination. The mandate is there, but it's not coordinated. And then we have public and private sectors that are not trusting each other and not coming on board at the same for an intentional purpose. And we have a constrained fiscus. We know we are a borrowing state, and we already derated, and we really are. You heard today that the divide, we are the most unequal society according to the World Bank. How do we then come back together? We have to have this kind of saying, we are focusing the next 5 NDP, National Development Plan, that's and the NPC when they sit. We need to consider saying, for the next 5 years, let's focus on one thing, forget everything else, it's health.
As much as we're talking about harnessing potential smaller scale first and then taking it one step at a time, what opportunities are there to close the digital divide specifically for persons with disabilities, as they're generally marginalized across all fronts? So how do you start marrying these conversations that, as much as you want to have them and tackle them individually, need to be solved simultaneously?
Absolutely, and now there's no excuse. Remember back before COVID, we had to work in the offices, so now you had to bring the disadvantaged into the areas and venues. Now we have no excuse. The spin-off, positive spin-off of COVID and digitalisation is that we can employ them where they are by enabling them, whether private sector comes and says telcos, we zero-rate data for them to have access. We create avenues for them to have gadgets to engage in that available data, for example. But at the same time, it's a matter of enabling them in that intentional. I'm coming back to intentionality, because if we don't identify where we're failing from the lack of intentionality as a country, because we are so endowed in South Africa.
Yeah.
We are able to self-sustain, but we tend to have a haphazard approach, bottom line being financial gain and not looking at the bigger picture of saying we can still gain more if we impact lives more for now. You know?
Zuko, I asked that question, and it follows on. Can we afford to be having this or that conversations, on a selective basis? So an example, with load shedding right now, internet connectivity is affected. Before addressing the digital divide, should the energy divide be addressed first? How do we approach this?
Well, it's got a direct impact on everything that we are discussing this morning. It has to be, we've had it for far too long, to be honest. The challenge that we're sitting with is that if that is not resolved, it's got an impact on the economy. Companies, organizations can't afford to continue the way things that are going now. But I think the other thing that people are starting to realize is that, for example, one of our core values is sustainability. Everybody is now getting more and more aware. Again, there's the haves and the have-nots that are going to get there earlier than others. We live in a beautiful country that has got sunshine possibly 10 months of the year. So there's alternative sources of energy that people should be tapping into. I would argue that should have happened years ago, and there should have been a platform to create that to help so that it doesn't put a strain on the core organization that's responsible for electricity. But if we were to sort that out, the rest of the conversation that we're having becomes slightly easier, because you must remember, for organizations, the same private sector, if you listen to the president a couple of weeks ago, he was talking that private sector needs to be part of the solution in creating jobs, and I agree. Reality is, and a lot of people are saying, yeah, but government is responsible for creating jobs. Private sector is actually responsible for creating jobs, because when you create, the more successful the economy, the better the economy grows, the better one would think that the better government is going to function, because the tax collection that comes out of the private sector helps with the challenges that government has got. So the two, you can't separate the two. So as corporates, we've got a golden opportunity to work together. One of the challenges that we have is that we've got this solo mentality where everybody wants to shine alone, and I don't think that is sustainable.
Absolutely not. Did you want to add anything, Linda?
I completely agree, and I think that's exactly the point I was making when I said we need coordination.
We talk about this coordination, and we've very much, for a bulk of this conversation, put government responsibility and corporate responsibility at the forefront. An individual wants to know, how can individuals address this problem in their communities? What kind of support is available on that basis? Because we should, if possible, do our part too.
Yeah, and I have given it some thought, but I think that's exactly my point. I think sitting as an individual, if I wanted to, let's say, help somebody along their digital journey, enable them as an individual, without the backing of a platform, of a corporate or anything like that, I don't think I'd know where to start. And that's probably the point that I was making when I said, as an individual, it's really difficult to determine where do we go next, and for what purpose. And so, yeah, I think there's something definitely there that we need to start having discussions about.
Yeah, are these conversations at all, Taniko, that you're exploring, how to take things down to an individualized basis?
Yes, most definitely. And I think how individuals can start is by upskilling themselves and then paying that forward within their communities. I think the other thing is that as a nation, we need to, with our unemployment rate being so high, we need to look towards upskilling our youth to be entrepreneurs. We need to look at the entrepreneurial route, because that also contributes immensely to the economy, especially with the very large job shortage in the country. And again, it's quite easy to upskill yourselves with these future skills. You know, there's so many online courses that you can do within a week or two and quickly use that. Like, I'll just use an example of getting skills to learn HTML and CSS, for instance. That's web development. You can learn that in like 2 weeks and then use it in your community to teach other people around you. But also you can build websites for other companies and actually charge them for it and earn an income.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the power there, Taniko, what you've just said, is that what we tend to take for granted is the multiplier effect around these things.
Yeah.
If you train one person and then that person extends that. you know.
100%.
I mentioned the 31,800 plus jobs that are going to be created in the Salesforce ecosystem. But when you look at those and you look at the multiplier effect, the responsibility that those individuals have, there could be a multiplier of 4, 5, 6 responsibility. So that contributes to basically progressing the country and maybe hopefully reducing the divide that we have in terms of affordability and other things, and decency.
Yes.
I know, Dibakatso, that we're talking about this multiplier effect, right? But will the e-commerce industry be the biggest winner when the digital divide is tightened? If so, how will the informal sector in South Africa be impacted?
I think I agree with that statement, really, 100%, that it will be, the e-commerce will advance more if that gap is tightened. And the impact also, I mean, we're talking about each one, teach one. I mean, that multiplier effect that we're talking about then goes to the informal sector as well, because I, for example, as an IT specialist, go home to the rural areas every now and then, December time. And so when we go there, let it not be just about me and my immediate family. Gather a little bit, go to your old school, gather a little bit of a few kids, teach them whatever you know, as little as it might be, and leave them with a mandate to teach others the same thing that they know. And that now, they ends up getting to the mother, the grandmother who sells magwinya, fed cakes. And they've got a little bit of, so you create a substrate in each one of us, so that when there's now education and all these courses that are available online, that when they gain access to those one day, there's something to build on. You know, that each one teach one. And then the e-commerce then, because we know that the unserved township economy is what everybody's eyes is on now. So you get there when we have to now, as business, go and create that awareness and of basics of demystifying, of also ensuring that people are aware that they have access to this and it's for their benefit. It can how they can be advanced in terms of their own small businesses, as informal as they are, and then we build on from that.
On that trail of thought with, what was it? Each one, teach one.
Yes.
How do we learn? What global lessons do we in South Africa are we capable of extracting from? I know that Dimakatso mentioned South Korea, mentioned Lithuania as well. Are there any lessons we can learn on a global perspective and implement locally right here in South Africa?
And I mean, certainly we've definitely, with the global reach that we have as an organization, I mean, we've been able to, and I mentioned one in terms of Trailhead, which was this micro-learning. But certainly we are bringing a lot of that learning and lessons from, because digital divide is not something unique to South Africa. It's certainly not. There are countries that are looking towards addressing that potentially better than what we are. But I think to the point, and I think we made the statement really early on, is to say, even within South Africa, we cannot have a cookie cutter approach. We really actually need to have the conversations with the people we are trying to include in this technology. And those are the people that need to tell us where we need to go next. I think to have this sort of approach where we tell them how it's going to work is potentially not going to be as effective as we think it will.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for having joined me here this morning, for sharing your insights and your perspectives with us. It's been a great pleasure hosting you all. And thank you for having joined us from wherever you've been watching this morning. It's been a pleasure hosting you. And thank you for all your engagement as well, keeping this conversation fueled. For now, from me, Alicia Seckham, it's goodbye.